Donald Trump keeps losing. Case after case after case. And the most recent loss is near and dear to my heart because Harvard beat the pants off of Donald Trump last night. It is an incredible decision. And as someone who graduated from Harvard Law School, I must say I would have been deeply ashamed if my university had caved to Donald Trump and done something completely weak and shameful, such as what Columbia University did, or many law firms did. Do not negotiate with a hostage taker. Do not capitulate to a man. We do not appease fascists. So I am proud to be a graduate of that school. And I want to now share with you that victory, a little bit about it. I'm going to tell you about 3 different boom victories in court against Donald Trump, and we will unpack some of them. So let me start with sharing with you this incredible landmark victory for Harvard. Let us go with Abby Phillip breaking it out for us.
Tonight, it's Harvard 2, Trump 0. A federal judge finding the administration broke the law by freezing billions of dollars in research funding at the school in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. Now, it's the same judge who blocked Trump's ban on international students at the school in June. And she writes, quote, "We must fight against anti-Semitism, but we equally need to protect our rights, including our right to free speech, and neither goal nor needs to be sacrificed on the other." The White House says it'll immediately appeal this decision. Christine Quinn joins us at the table now. And Dan, I'm curious, what do you think about this ruling and where it heads now?
Well, look, I think as a legal matter, the judge is probably right. And we've talked about this before, actually, on this show, that the link of the funding on medical funding to anti-Semitism made no sense, right? I mean, come on, let's be honest. Of course, the funding being withheld wasn't about anti-Semitism. Their argument in court is, well, anti-Semitism is a legitimate goal to try to fix. And by the way,
so I can't continue listening to Dan Abrams, right? Because he's kind of going off on something that isn't specifically tied to the case, right? He was about to launch into, there might be good arguments. Okay, that's not what this case was about. So I want to share with you exactly why this was a victory. What did Harvard sue about? What was this lawsuit about, right? Most importantly, what did Harvard win and why did they win? We're talking about more than $2.6 billion in funding that federal administrative agencies who Donald Trump was commanding froze. $2.6 billion. And I want you to understand why Harvard won and why other universities across the country and other organizations who are having funding frozen under false pretexts may have really strong arguments here to push back. Again, we are talking about why Harvard won. Okay, so I'm going to share with you my screen right here. I think you can see it with my notes. And I'm going to blow this up for you even more so you can see this. So what we're looking at here is a case decided last night by a federal district judge in Massachusetts. This is the same judge, my friends, who ruled earlier this year, this spring, that Harvard could not, that Trump could not ban Harvard from admitting international students. Now, the plaintiffs in this case include Harvard, as well as various other entities, including the Association of University Professors, as well as various labor unions. Okay, so this is important. These are two different suits that were brought against various federal agencies. And ultimately, this says $2.2 billion in federal grants to Harvard. Today, the Harvard Crimson reported it was $2.6 billion, as have others. So I'm going with that. Now, here's the key thing. Here's a key paragraph, and I'm not going to totally bore you with all the legal details, but I want to share this with you here. This is what the case was about. 3 different points. Harvard and the other plaintiffs had 3 grounds to say that what Donald Trump was doing was illegal. So first, and I'm just going to say Harvard, because generally speaking, that's what we're talking about. Harvard argued first that these funding cut decisions were made in response to Harvard refusing to capitulate to the Trump demands that were content and viewpoint based, right? So Harvard says, you cut our funding because we would not deliver a message that you wanted us to deliver. This violates the First Amendment, Harvard's First Amendment rights. As part of this First Amendment argument, Harvard also said, guys, and I think you don't, I'm just wondering whether you want to, I'm going to keep sharing the screen so you can see it. I think that's what you probably want. Harvard also argued that you are withdrawing our funding also because we sued you. Now, the second argument they made was not under the First Amendment. It was under Title VII, which is a federal statute. And they said that terminating these grants under Title VII, under the statute, that you didn't follow the right procedures. Okay, great. And the third grounds, this is a really interesting one, is that when these Trump agencies froze and then terminated funding to Harvard, nearly $2.6 billion, that they acted in a manner that was arbitrary and capricious. And that has legal meaning, okay? And they said that this was, it was arbitrary and capricious. Why? What are they saying? Because Harvard was never told by the government why they were doing it and how, and this is what Dan was getting at, how freezing funding, let's say, to the medical school would further the goal of ending anti-Semitism. Furthermore, it was arbitrary and capricious because these were grants that the university had relied on for decades. And they had planned out research agendas and filled labs full of equipment, for example, and hired grad students based on that reliance. What was Donald Trump's response, his agency? They argued that the court lacked jurisdiction to hear these claims and others. So the bottom line is, it was a huge loss for Donald Trump. But this is on the heels of other losses. Now, this is so important because the 2 things Donald Trump cares about that all relates to his entire, I'm putting his face, his ego, his persona. Controlling money and also physical power, violence against people, controlling them in that way. And for Donald Trump to get slapped back by a federal court saying you cannot tell Harvard what to do, you cannot hold those purse strings, is infuriating to him. Now, I want to be really clear. This isn't just about, no, Donald, you don't get to control Harvard, or Stephen Miller, you don't get to control Harvard. And it's not just about the important work universities do in things like curing cancer and finding new methods to research information that will affect our financial markets or our better understanding of history or even the human purpose of being, right? It's not just about that. Harvard's motto is veritas. That means truth. Donald Trump is the enemy to truth. Universities, whether private or public, are institutions that have endured in our society. Sure, they're affected by, whatever the economic system is. Yes, they're affected by capitalism. Yes, they're, affected by whatever the current social mores are. But largely, they're insulated from the day-to-day markets. They're usually insulated from day-to-day political grievances. These are powerful institutions that any authoritarian wants to control and dominate because they are going to be critical of people like Donald Trump, who spins out lies. Institutions like universities depend upon evidence-based research outcomes. Their prestige is about winning Nobel Prizes. Hello, not the kind that Donald thinks he's going to get, which he won't, the Nobel Peace Prize. These are places that have endured. Brands. Harvard is a brand bigger than Trump's brand. So this is very big for his authoritarian and personal agendas about controlling money and about domination. So moving on in this theme of law, money, and power are the other losses that Donald Trump has experienced. And in this vein, I want to tell you the most recent one, right before the Harvard ruling. We had an incredibly important ruling under the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this one, I am going to dig a little bit deeper, but let me first tell you what this is about. Remember that Donald Trump has attempted to deport people from the U.S., people who usually are Venezuelan nationals, but others, to get them on airplanes without any due process and send them to foreign countries, whether it is El Salvador or somewhere else in the globe from which he chooses. And the biggest argument that the Trump administration has been making is that due process doesn't apply because this thing called the Alien Enemies Act does. Now, the Alien Enemies Act is an extremely old statute dating back to the early days of this nation's existence, the late 18th century, okay? That means the late 1700s. I know you know that, but it's early in the morning. And it has been invoked in the past in very shameful periods of our nation's history, such as the creation of the internment camps to house or to imprison Japanese Americans or Japanese nationals during World War II. Now, Donald Trump was invoking the Alien Enemies Act again so he could skip these due process protections and just send people out of the country. Well, we finally got a ruling from a court on this. And so let me share with you a quick video from Ellie. I'm sorry. I've got this and I want to share my screen with you. I want to share a video from Ellie Honing, my friend from CNN, who is also, it turns out, a Harvard Law School graduate. And we will play that for you right now.
blow to President Trump's immigration crackdown. A federal appeals court says he unlawfully invoked the Alien Enemies Act to quickly deport alleged Venezuelan gang members. The Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the administration cannot move forward with using the centuries-old wartime law for deportations in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. In a 2-1 decision, the judges rejected President Trump's claim of an invasion or predatory incursion by the gang Tren de Aragua. The case is widely expected to end up before the Supreme Court. We have CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig here with us on this. All right, Ellie, first off, why did the court 2-1 say that there was no predatory incursion by the Venezuela gang Tren de Aragua, as Trump had claimed?
Well, because those terms simply do not apply to the situation here in the court's ruling. Now, Brianna, this is a historic ruling. This is the first time a federal court of appeals has ever reversed a president's invocation of that Alien Enemies Act. Now, it's only been invoked a handful of times in our history, most recently before this World War II, but this is a first. Now, as you said, the law empowers the president to deport non-citizens if they are part of an invasion or a predatory incursion carried out by a foreign nation or government. And in this decision today, the court goes through those terms and said there needs to be some element of organization. You can't just say, well, we have large numbers of immigrants or emigrants coming to this country. That's not enough. And there's not enough of a tie that any of this comes from a foreign state or a foreign government. So simply put, the court just looked at the terms of the law and said they do not properly apply to the actual situation here.
So what's the effect of this ruling? What are the limitations of this ruling?
So for now, it means that at least in the Fifth Circuit, there cannot be deportations under the cited Alien Enemies Act. But I think, Brianna, this one is absolutely headed back to the Supreme Court. Now, it did make a detour at the Supreme Court earlier in the spring, and the Supreme Court did not rule on whether the Alien Enemies Act applies. They simply said that people who are going to be deported under this law, they do get some minimal due process rights. And in the process of exercising those due process rights, that's how we got to this decision. So the Fifth Circuit is one of 13 circuits, federal circuits in this country. And typically, once a case has gone up to the Court of Appeals, the circuits, the next step here is likely going to be the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think it's a case the Supreme Court has been expecting to come back to it and really almost has to take, because we can't have a situation where you have potentially different outcomes in the different circuits.
So to the layperson, they might look at that and say, wait, why did they get this, as an emergency matter, kick it back down, only to ultimately get it again? It seems like a bunch of back and forth, and ultimately the Supreme Court is going to have to decide.
Brianna.
It's a perfectly reasonable response and one that I share. Why not just decide it? Instead, they do what they do sometimes on the Supreme Court. They decided it on a very narrow basis. They basically just said, for now, these deportations can proceed. However, lower courts, you have to make sure that people are getting due process. It was all but a certainty that we would come back to this point, that in the process of that due process, someone would challenge the Alien Enemies Act. And now we have our first Court of Appeals saying that the way the president has used it is unconstitutional.
Okay, so of course, Donald Trump is appealing this, right? A couple things I want to point out that Ellie said, which is really quite important here. When he says it only covers the Fifth Circuit, remember that some of the states that go up to the Fifth Circuit includes Texas, right? And that is where a lot of these deportations are coming from, right? So the Fifth Circuit includes Texas. It includes the three states are Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Okay, so you may have been hearing from Louisiana that people are being flown out of Louisiana and Texas. So right now, this is on hold until the Supreme Court rules on this. Now, I'm going to get to the third case, but I first want to share with you what he is talking about legally, right? I'm going to share my screen with the text of the statute about the Alien Enemies Act. When Donald Trump is invoking it, and when Pete Hegseth or the Department of Homeland Security, Homeland is invoking it, what are they even talking about, right? So let's take a look at that statute. Okay, so let me share this with you. I think you can see it. And this is, I'm sorry, I've got my IEPA statute. That is not the statute I want. Let's switch. Okay, so this is the Alien Enemies Act. It's now under 50 USC section 21. Okay, and I know this says 1918, but it actually goes back before that. This is just when it was codified there. So this is, let me be really clear. It says whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the president makes public proclamation of the event, all native citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government being of the age of 14 years and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. The president is authorized in any such event by his proclamation thereof or other public act to direct the conduct to be observed on the part of the United States toward the aliens who become so liable. Okay, so what you're seeing here, of course, in this section 21 is a conditionality. What is the condition? Declared war between the U.S. and any foreign nation. That did not happen with Venezuela. Yeah, I know. We'll talk about that boat. We'll talk about the boat that our government blew up illegally, but we'll get to that in a second. But there has been no war, and there hadn't been a war declared between us and Venezuela. Okay, so or it says declared war between the U.S. and any foreign nation or government. That didn't happen. Or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated. Okay, but that is what they're leaning into. What Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and others are claiming is that immigrants who come to this country either unlawfully or without documentation, they're claiming that is an invasion or predatory incursion. But that language doesn't stand alone. I'm really clear here. It says declared war, right? Or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign government, any foreign nation or government. This so-called invasion or predatory incursion has to be driven by a foreign nation or government. So guys, that's not what's happening. So this was kind of a slam dunk for a federal judge to make this ruling. I mean, sometimes the easiest thing to do is look at the fucking law itself, you guys. I mean, you don't actually need a law degree to read a statute. What you need the law degree to do is to have the context to know sometimes the language in the statute might have been overruled or interpreted in a different way, and on and on and on, right? And it gets a little more complicated than that. But I encourage you, look these things up, as we just did. Now we have yet another loss for Donald Trump. This happened on Friday. Okay, this happened on Friday, and this is the IEPA statute. This relates to striking down Donald Trump's tariffs, right? Again, this man wants to control money, and he wants to use power, physical force, kinetic power on the global scale, force against individuals in the streets and in his own personal zone, right? He's about money and violence and doesn't care what the law says. So I want to share with you that IEPA decision. This is also really huge. And I am super psyched that he keeps losing on this front. Okay, so let's play this one too. So you have context. Let's do it.
BC.
Hey, Brian. So just to catch everybody up on where this case stood, this is the consolidated case that the Court of International Trade had back in the spring, found that most of these tariffs imposed for national security reasons or for reasons of international economic emergency, I should say, to be more specific, were not legal. This is the first round of appeals. This case is upholding that ruling. They're saying that they agree with the initial court. This is the appeals court saying they agree with the Court of International Trade that because this statute does not say that this is an international emergency, that because of this international emergency, he should be allowed to impose tariffs via executive order. That's why they're upholding the ruling. Now, a couple crucial points on where we go from here, Brian. One is that this will all but certainly go to the Supreme Court. So we know that will be the next step. We knew this court was listening to this on an expedited basis so that it could get to the Supreme Court even faster, potentially get a ruling sometime in the spring or summer. What we don't know right now that is crucial is what happens to the tariffs in the meantime. Again, this is the vast majority of all of the tariffs the president has imposed so far were imposed under this IEEPA statute. So now the appeals court agreeing he doesn't have the authority to use it in that way. But this court appears to be sending the decision on whether a universal injunction should go in place to stop the government from collecting the tariffs. They appear to be sending that back to the Court of International Trade to decide. So based on my initial read of this ruling, and again, it's quite long, we're still going through it, it seems like the status of the tariffs at the moment is still in limbo. Just one other thing I would flag, Brian, is just earlier today, administration officials had filed a brief in this case to argue that they needed to keep collecting the tariffs, that otherwise it would put them on sort of shaky diplomatic ground. They would be losing out on
Oh, well. Oh, well, kind of too bad for you when you break the law, Donald. Okay, so why is this important? Yes, he's going to go up to the Supreme Court here to try to make sure there's not, to try to overturn this decision, not just to stop it from being nationwide, but to stop it entirely. Now, once again, this is a no-brainer if you look at the statute, the International Economic Emergencies Powers Act. And there's two things to think about. One, because this is a statute under which Congress gives the president in advance rights to take extraordinary actions without congressional approval if there is an international economic emergency. So again, number one, in order to invoke the statute, there has to be an international economic emergency. And two, the action or actions the president takes have to be within the ones the statute permits. I mean, this is kind of, again, a no-brainer. So I think you might want to join me and take a quick peek at this International Economic Powers Act statute. And by the way, there's actually a fourth case. There's another case that Donald Trump lost, and we'll get to that too in a moment. But let me share my screen with you again. We are going to take a look at that. Okay. Now, this is so fun. This is kind of like, what would you call it? A mini law school class. Let's look. Law in the news. So this is the International Economic Emergency Powers Act as codified under 50 USC 1701. And the descriptive title is Unusual and Extraordinary Threat, Declaration of a National Emergency, and Exercise of Presidential Authorities. Okay. So this first section of this statute lays out when it is, and you can kind of see it, there's part A and part B, when it is that the president of the United States can use these special powers that are articulated in the next section. Okay, so in this section, it says in part A, any authority given to the president under this law, it says may be exercised to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat, which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the United States. And this threat has to be to national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States. And under Part A, it only is triggered if the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threat. Okay, well, A. And B, even, B, the authorities that are granted to this president may only be exercised to deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat with respect to which a national emergency has been declared for purposes of this chapter and may not be exercised for any other purpose. Any exercise of such authorities to deal with any new threat shall be based on a new declaration of national emergency. Okay. So even presuming that with respect to any of or all of the statutes, this national emergency is declared, it doesn't mean that it truly was one, right? And two, what does a president have the right to do, right? So all of the things, if this statute is triggered, if a true international economic emergency is articulated and declared by the president, what he can actually do is under subsections A, B, and C. And some things are to investigate, regulate, or prohibit certain foreign exchange transactions. You could block imports and exports of securities or currency. You could stop loan payments. You could investigate blocking things like trade, right? So this is, I'm just going to stop sharing this because it gets, we don't need to get into the weeds, but you get the idea here that what the court is saying or said in the IEPA case is no dice. Now, this is hugely a problem for Donald Trump, and he's ranting and raving about, he's saying things like our whole economy will collapse if he can't collect these tariffs. Now, we had an economy before this without them, these major unlawful tariffs, one. And two, he's also claiming that the court doesn't have authority. That is not going to work. And finally, what is the most infuriating here is Donald Trump is claiming that foreign countries brought this lawsuit, but it's like U.S. businesses. If you look at who brought this case, it is, it's just astonishing. The lead plaintiff in this case is called VOS Selections, Inc. versus Donald Trump and so on, right? So we have, these are the plaintiffs: VOS Selections, Inc., Plastic Services and Products, LLC, doing business as Genova Pipe, Microkits, LLC, Fish USA, Inc., and so on. So I guess I'm just concerned that he is still attempting, this case was decided August 29th, that he's still attempting to lie to us about who's paying the tariffs and who's unhappy about them. So there's that. Now, the last case I want to mention that Donald Trump lost was out of California. This is the case Gavin Newsom, governor of California, brought under another really old statute, the Posse Comitatus Act. And Donald Trump yelled at someone at his Proof of Life press conference. He yelled at a reporter who asked him, "How do you feel about losing that case?" And Donald Trump lashed out and said, "Well, the judge said I can keep the National Guard there, so I won." Well, no, he didn't win, because there are serious limitations on what the National Guard can do when it is in California. And, that is another loss for Donald Trump, right? This is, and I want to share this with you because I think this is very helpful. This is from Face the Nation. So let me just get this to you so you can understand what this ruling was about. It's all going to tie together when we talk about the next steps, because Donald Trump isn't going to take this lying down. Things may get worse. And so I want to tell you what I anticipate as the courts hold up the rule of law, what Donald is going to try to do to continue his path toward domination, toward dictatorship, and so on. So let me share this with you about the Posse Comitatus Act. Here we go.
A federal judge ruled against the Trump administration's use of federalized National Guard and active duty Marines in Los Angeles, the judge finding it violated the Posse Comitatus Act. President Trump decried that ruling, pledging to appeal this to the Supreme Court. But let's bring you some clarity and explain the reasoning behind the ruling. Posse Comitatus is Latin for the power of the county. It describes people, military or civilian, asked to assist with law enforcement activities, and it dates back to the Reconstruction era. Congress wanted to ban federal troops from being used by governors to keep control over southern states' legislatures. Now, the law requires congressional approval for the military to engage in civilian law enforcement activities, and that includes the National Guard members who are called up by the president or federalized. And there are some exceptions, though. You see it here. The Insurrection Act allows for the military to serve as law enforcement, to uphold a court order, to protect civil rights if local officials won't, or if a state's government asks the president to. There's also Title 32 status, which may sound familiar. Under that, the National Guard can undertake missions requested by the president, but still they report to the state's governor. Now, President Trump used Title 32, you may remember, to send National Guard troops to the southern border back in 2018 and during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. It's also been used during major emergencies after 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. The judge in the Los Angeles case said because President Trump didn't use any of the valid exceptions we've just mentioned, those troops violated the law by participating in civil law enforcement actions like traffic enforcement and arrests.
Okay, let's tie all these cases together in the law, money, and power theme. With the Harvard case, the court decided that under this federal statute governing agency decisions, under the First Amendment, under Title VII, and under a federal agency statute governing decisions made by the agency, that they can't be arbitrary and capricious, and so on, that Donald Trump's government went beyond its authority, violated the law when it tried to cut money to Harvard University, right? So again, Donald Trump is surpassing legal authority, violated the law, trying to hold back $2.6 billion from Harvard. That's one case that we talked about. Another case that we talked about is that Donald Trump violated the law when he tried to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. This statute gives the president authority, right? Congress gave him authority, but he didn't have authority to round up Venezuelan citizens and other non-US citizens and throw them out of the country without due process by invoking this statute. Again, trying to go beyond the power Congress gave him, and loses that too. Then we get to the International Economic Emergency Powers Act that Donald Trump tried to use to tax US businesses, to impose an import tax on US businesses. Not permitted under that statute to do this, number one. And two, Congress has the power of the purse under the Constitution. So we get, again, violating. All three cases deal with constitutional and statutory violations. I'll get to the next one in a second, right? The first one with Harvard, violating the First Amendment, Harvard's First Amendment rights, as well as federal statutes, right? Then we get to this case of violating the rights, the constitutional rights of people in this country, their due process rights, and also violating this Alien Enemies statute, right? Then our third case with the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. It's a constitutional violation because it's Congress's power to, under Article 1, to impose taxes. And it's also a constitutional violation going beyond the bound. I'm sorry, a statutory violation going beyond the bounds of the grant in that statute. Then we get to the one we were just talking about, the Posse Comitatus Act. And once again, we are now into this realm of a statute that is allowing a president to use force in this country, but only under a very specific circumstance, the federal forces, and not to try to violate the rights and try to engage in normal local police powers activity in a state, going against states' rights. So you can see that Donald Trump wants to do what he wants to do with both the purse strings and also physical power under his aegis. And by the way, aegis is a word of the day from yesterday that I didn't get to put in the conversation. Thanks, AJ. Under his aegis, but actually not under his true authority. Guys, so that is what is going on here. Now, let us say what's happening next. And I also want to talk a bit about and thank the women and the survivors and their attorneys and everyone else, members of Congress, and all of us who stood up and listened yesterday to the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. We're going to get to that. But let's continue on Donald Trump's pursuit to consolidate his personal and political power. And let's talk about that last topic about Posse Comitatus and so on. Donald Trump is still hell-bent on invading cities. And I want to share with you what J.B. Pritzker had to say about this on Tuesday. I didn't show this to you yesterday because we were watching the press conference. I'm going to share this with you and show you how standing up to Donald Trump may actually prevent him from going into Chicago. Let's play what Pritzker had to say.
I'd like to ask a question of my own, and it's one the press should be asking as well. When did we become a country where it's okay for the U.S. president to insist on national television that a state should call him to beg for anything, especially something we don't want? Have we truly lost all sense of sanity in this nation, that we treat this as normal?
So we know, we've heard Pritzker before say, don't come here, Donald Trump. Now he's referring to Donald Trump at the press conferences previously where he was saying, I just want the governor of Illinois to ask me to come here. Well, Pritzker kept pushing back and pushing back. And so let's hear. Yesterday, Donald Trump had a press conference. Let's hear what he's saying. He's equivocating now about whether he's really going into Chicago.
But I could do that with Chicago. We could do that with New York. We could do it with Los Angeles. So we're making a determination now. Do we go to Chicago or do we go to a place like New Orleans, where we have a great governor, Jeff Landry, who wants us to come in and straighten out a very nice section of this country that's become quite tough, quite bad. So we're going to be going to maybe Louisiana, and you have New Orleans, which has a crime problem. We'll straighten that out in about 2 weeks. It'll take us 2 weeks, easier than D.C. But we could straighten out Chicago. All they have to do is ask us.
Oh, that's good. So don't ask. Now let's talk about violent crime in Chicago. It was a terrible weekend. I think the number was 6 people were killed in gunfights. And I want you to know, though, this happens in this country. And I agree. We have a problem with guns. We have a problem with violence. We even have a problem with sexual assault. But that's not what Donald Trump actually cares about. Because when it comes down to thousands of victims, 100 of whom showed up at the Capitol to speak their truths, to demand justice, to ask the Republican members of the House, because they don't have enough of them. They need 2 more. I think they had 4 Republicans join 100% of the Democrats in the House for this statute, for this declaration they want to make, for a statute asking the president to release the full Epstein files. I mean, this is not that big of an ask. And he is still denying that they deserve attention. This is a government who pardoned over 1,500 people who were participating in a violent insurrection, who had due process trials and convictions, pardoned them, and now wants to give them money to compensate them from their losses, and has done nothing about victims who he doesn't care about. Victims of shootings in Minnesota, the members of the legislature. Does he say a word about that? No. Right? These victims, Epstein victims, oh, he has words on that. So I want to share with you 2 things from yesterday. I know we watched it all together, but I want to share with you these survivors taking back their power. Now, as I put them up here, I'm not going to say their survivors' names because I know that they yesterday spoke out and they used their names, but I don't know what's happened since then, and I don't want to put them in any jeopardy. So I'm going to show you these clips, and unless their name is on the Chiron, I'm not going to mention it.
And also, I would like to announce here today, us Epstein survivors have been discussing creating our own list. We know the names. Many of us were abused by them. Now, together as survivors, we will confidentially compile the names we all know who were regularly in the Epstein world. And it will be done by survivors and for survivors. No one else is involved. Stay tuned for more details.
That was a moment from the rally that was before the press conference. And then later, I believe she and others talked about this list, as did their lawyer, Bradley Edwards. This is smart that they are coming together and sharing. Some of them were just understanding that their power, their decision to speak just now. There are others who, when they spoke yesterday, said that until in 2019, Epstein was arrested, that for the second time, they thought they were alone. There are women who spoke yesterday who were abused by Epstein and Maxwell after he spent that brief time in work release in prison in Florida. So there were a lot of people who are coming into their voices in power. And for them to come together and share information and vet for themselves the names of these people in Epstein's orbit, that's important. And the next step might be, as they discussed at the press conference, releasing that information, but they feel they shouldn't have to. This is the work that Congress could do. Congress, or even, what about the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche? Why doesn't he ask Bradley Edwards and the other attorneys who represent many victims or many survivors? He could meet with them and say, who are your names? Have they? No, because they don't care. And let me say what Donald Trump had to say when he was asked about this.
Now, there have been survivors of Jeffrey Epstein speaking at a press conference on Capitol Hill. They're calling for these case files, these documents to be released. And Thomas Massie, who was sponsoring a discharge petition, should get the House to vote on these documents, says he doesn't believe you're implicated in these files, but many of your friends and donors may be, and he says that's why the Justice Department is redacting them and slow walking the release. Is the Justice Department protecting any friends or donors, sir?
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more.
and nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president.
Trying to get people to talk about something irrelevant to me, to my success. That's what he's saying. These are victims of one of the largest child sex trafficking rings in history. History, not just US history, I think the world's history. I've never heard of anything this massive. It should be the concern of any leader to care about that. Now, of course, we know why he doesn't, because Epstein was his friend for 15 years, and they're probably extremely wealthy people who want this to stay quiet. Now, as for releasing all this information, that's bullshit. Even Massey said yesterday, the most recent 33,000 pages were like 97% of it apparently was stuff people had already seen, and the rest was irrelevant. Anyone who has worked in any litigation knows you can flood someone with useless paper, useless documentation. So to say they'll never be satisfied, this is all bullshit. Now, do you know how victims, how survivors feel when he says that? One survivor, when she was asked, how do you feel when you hear Donald Trump say something like this? She said, it seems like I'm being gutted. And I want you to also hear from someone who responded directly to Donald Trump's comment, because he's in the White House having his press conference and they are on the Capitol steps at the same time. So reporters are able to ask for the response. Let's play that.
The president has said that this Epstein issue is a hoax, is the word that he used. Can we get your reactions to what you think when you hear him say that?
I'll answer that. Mr. President Donald J. Trump, I am a registered Republican, not that that matters because this is not political. However, I cordially invite you to the Capitol to meet me in person so you can understand this is not a hoax. We are real human beings. This is real trauma.
What does it feel like emotionally to hear that?
Devastating. It's being gutted from the inside out. Not that I would know what that feels like, but I imagine it's the anxiety buildup with the depression and the survival mode, and then your nervous system goes limp and ironically is shot. And it feels like you just want to explode inside because nobody, again, is understanding that this is a real situation. These women are real. We're here in person. To say that it's a hoax is just not... Please humanize us. I would like Donald J. Trump and every person in America and around the world to humanize us, to see us for who we are and to hear us for what we have to say. There is no hoax. The abuse was real.
Oh my God, that's so hard. And one last thing. That woman was brave to be able to directly speak to Donald Trump. It's like, come see me, right? That's pretty aggressive and pretty powerful. I'm going to share this with you where a reporter asked another survivor, do you have something to say to Donald Trump? Let's hear what she said.
What is your message to President Trump on this? Listen, I don't want to send a direct message to him. I'm already scared enough. Yeah, just pass the vote. Listen to us. This is not a hoax. It's not going to go away. And like I said on my speech earlier, we're not going to be silenced anymore. We will be speaking moving forward wherever we need to be. We will be, and we need to pass this.
Go ahead.
I'm already scared enough. Incredible. Really, really incredible. And even as he was saying it was a hoax, Donald Trump still continued with a planned, and I don't know when he planned it because this press conference has been planned for weeks. Donald Trump had a flyover of military planes above the Capitol while they were speaking. It was jarring. It was aggressive. but it won't stop them. Remember, thank you, Mark, there are more of us than there are of them. We need to be connected. We need to be linked, not ranked. We need to think in terms of solidarity and in terms of community. Now, I want to return for you before we get to the end of the show in Crazy Town to this kind of the violence that Donald Trump is perpetrating inside the U.S. domestically and outside. So let's first go back to what it means for local economies when he sends in the troops. Let me play this for you.
President now floating this idea of sending the troops into New Orleans instead of Chicago. And I found it interesting yesterday in the Oval Office in reference to Governor Pritzker. He said, if he'd called me up, I'd love to help. Do you feel like Trump is starting to soften his stance on this crackdown at all?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I actually think he's picking it up. He realizes that these big cities, most of them are out of control. And from a business standpoint, somebody chairs a small business committee, it's hurting small businesses. And we need to get people in there that will act by the law. And if it means sending the National Guard in to get things straightened out, I don't have any problem with it.
Yeah.
Okay. He doesn't have any problem with it. And Donald Trump repeatedly says businesses are doing great in DC. That's not what the numbers say, right? Restaurants reservations are down. So, you know, I want safe cities. I'm happy I live in a safe city. Detroit is doing incredible. But that didn't happen with someone sending in National Guard. That happened with creating economic opportunity, having local police presence, including the university police around. It's about having jobs, about having, getting rid of old abandoned buildings. There's a lot of work that it takes to help create safer environments and more opportunities for all, and to get people who are hell-bent on violence off the streets, but using due process, okay? Now, in terms of speaking of due process, when we were watching that Proof of Life press conference, in the middle of it, Donald Trump talked about how I think he said, we shot out a boat. What was he talking about? He was talking about a U.S. strike on a boat in the Venezuelan waters. I want to share this more on this with you. I'm very concerned because there has yet to be supplied by our government to us what the legal justification was. If this was a small boat with just 11 people, you can apprehend it. You don't just shoot it down. There is no international law or justification for this. Let me just play what Senator Ron Paul had to say about this.
U.S. officials described the individuals killed by the U.S. strike as narco-terrorists does not transform them into lawful military targets. The U.S. is not engaged in an armed conflict with Venezuela or Trinidad. The strike runs afoul to the right to life under international human rights law. So the president basically said that these guys are terrorists. You can kill terrorists. You can't, I guess, kill drug dealers just for dealing drugs, right?
Well, this is, brings up a question. So, we assume these people were bad people and drug dealers, but if they were caught off the coast of Miami, we would stop the boat. If they don't shoot at us, we don't shoot at them. They're confiscated, they're put in jail, and then they go through a trial to prove what they were doing. And if they have 20 pounds of cocaine or heroin or something on the boat, they'll be convicted. The reason we have trials, though, and we don't automatically assume guilt is, what if we make a mistake and they happen to be people fleeing Venezuela, the Venezuelan dictator? I think probably that, we had the facts correct. We got bad people here. But that's the reason, off our coast, it isn't our policy just to blow people up. We don't blow up ships entering our waters unless they're, hell-bent on attacking another ship, or unless they are resisting with gunfire. Right. We arrest people. So it is difficult, and it's hard because obviously they're bad people. So people they want something bad to happen to them. But typically, even the worst people in our country, if we accuse somebody of a terrible crime, they still get a trial. Basically, they get a lawyer, they get their day in court.
Yeah. But if we're at war, you know, we blow up bad guys all the time. I think that's what they're saying. This is a war, and we do have. I mean, obviously, you know the numbers of how many people in this country die from illicit drugs that come in from Central and South America. A lot of them have fentanyl and other very dangerous ingredients in them. I mean, people drop dead all the time. I mean, they kill 100,000 people a year on a bad year. 100,000 Americans dying. That does kind of feel like a war.
It's also why in our country war is the exception. So when we have a war, it was intended that we would declare war, be a big vote of our Congress, and then at that point in time we say, if that enemy, if we are at war, let's say with Venezuela, then we say their ships are, you know, free to shoot them anywhere they are, anytime. And so we kill them off their coast, we kill them in their country, but we've declared war on them. It's a little harder here because this is a crime and this is a criminal syndicate. So look, once again, no love lost for the people who died that are trying to infiltrate our country with this filth. But at the same time, you have to realize it's not as simple as it may sound that
we have not declared war in Venezuela. Do you see what's happening here, though? Donald Trump wants to be in a war with Venezuela. Donald Trump wants to be in a war with any country who has immigrants here who he doesn't like. Let's just say who do not present as white people. That is what's going on here. In addition, Donald Trump wants to be at war because he got that idea from Zelensky. You know, Ukraine is physically under physical attack. Russia is bombing the country. There have not been elections because it's not possible or safe to have them. Donald Trump had Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office a few weeks ago and said, well, I guess we wouldn't have to. I mean, essentially, maybe we won't have. He didn't say it verbatim, but the implication was, well, we won't have elections if we're at war. It's all part of his plan, right? And I have not heard any pushback on this extrajudicial killing, on this murder of people in this boat. Who were they? They could be people being trafficked. It could be drug dealers. I don't think that matters. We follow the law. Now, one last thing. I know we're going a little bit before Crazy Town. I saw people in the chat saying E. Jean Carroll should have been at the press conference. I want to keep in mind that E. Jean Carroll was not a victim or survivor of Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, so she shouldn't have been there now, but I do want to share with you something really exciting about E. Jean. This is, by the way, first let me start. This is a photo after E. Jean won her first case. And when you see her in this photo, the reason why I have this photo, I was at this dinner, but E. Jean's obviously in the teal sweater and black turtleneck. To her left, which is our right, is a filmmaker by the name of Ivy Miracle. Then right next to E. Jean, squeezing her face right in there, is Robbie Kaplan, E. Jean's attorney. To Robbie's right, to our left, is Katie Fang, who was on our show the other day. At that same level, you know Joyce Vance. Above Joyce is Marissa Rothkopf, who I'm often on her show, The Secret Life of Cookies. And behind her is an actress, and I'm trying to remember her name. I feel like, it's Ellen Barkin, who was there as well that night. So these are the people. And the reason why I want to share this with you is because of the woman on our right, Ivy Miracle. What is happening? Ivy is a documentary filmmaker, and her new film called Ask E. Jean, her documentary, just premiered last weekend at Telluride. This is a really important film festival, and it got a brilliant review from Variety. So let me read the headline, written by Taurus Lafley. Ask E. Jean review. Urgent documentary sharply follows a pioneering media personality who sued Trump with sexual assault and defamation allegations and won twice. Okay, there was another review, which wasn't as exciting as this one. So this is the one you should look at, of course. And I want to read you from this review. With the sharply structured documentary, Ask E. Jean, director Ivy Miracle accomplishes the near impossible, telling the story of Carol in a manner as consistently enthralling and unapologetic as its subject. How can one possibly fit the multiple electrifying lives that Carol thrived in into 90-something compact minutes? Throughout her movie, Meeropol shows the way with panache, refusing to limit the main appeal of Carol to her recent lawsuit wins against Trump. In that, Ask E. Jean isn't at all interested in painting a false sense of victimhood. Instead, it succeeds as a celebration of a singularly authentic person, one that beat Trump, not only against the odds and in spite of his powers, but also thanks to who she has always been as a truth teller in the male-dominated spaces of her career. So what is next for this documentary? Obviously, someone needs to pick it up for distribution so that you and I get to watch it in the theaters. Let's keep our eyes on that, and I certainly will keep you posted. The question is anyone brave enough? I am hoping that after this Harvard win and after these other examples of Trump being slapped down, the people with the money to distribute this film have the courage to do so. Now, with that, let us go to Crazy Town. Okay, guys, Crazy Town today is at the intersection of Donald Trump and Andrew flippin' Cuomo. Yes, Donald Trump is trying to get everyone to drop out of the election, of the November mayoral election in New York, because he doesn't want Zohran Mamdani, who got the Democratic nomination, to win. So remember, there are a number of people running against him. One guy just dropped out. And so we've got Zohran Mamdani on the Democratic ticket. We still have Eric Adams running in the general. We still have, of course, Andrew Cuomo. And then also there's Curtis Sliwa running as the Republican. Donald Trump has apparently reached out to Eric Adams, trying to promise something in the administration for him. This is the Crazy Town. And I want to share with you the conversation that Zohran Mamdani had last night with Chris Hayes, just a piece of it. This is Crazy Town.
So what do you think about all this?
I think it's outrageous. And I think oftentimes in a race such as this, it's tempting to think of this solely in the question of how does this impact the race? But this is an affront to our city's democracy. This is an affront to the values that make so many of us proud to be Americans, that we could choose our own leaders, not that our leaders pick themselves or their friends. And we're seeing in this time when Donald Trump has taken snap from hungry New Yorkers, has passed legislation that would throw millions of New Yorkers off their health insurance, that we have Democrats in Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams working with this administration to try and subvert the will of Democratic primary voters right here in New York City.
Yeah. It's outrageous. I'm looking at every one of you New Yorker who think that it's okay to vote for Andrew Cuomo. He is Trump's candidate. Now, there was something else as part of this Crazy Town. Cuomo saying, I'm the only one who can work with Donald Trump, so you should vote for me in New York. Well, Mamdani pointed out that we don't want someone to work with Donald Trump. We want someone to fight with Donald Trump. And guess who would he be fighting with? It would be Mamdani, if he wins, as the mayor of New York. It would be Kathy Hochul as the governor of New York. And you get these two together who would have each other's backs. They have already decided to, Hochul is decided to would work with him. Now, I think she's fallen short of exactly endorsing him, but this is really quite important. I also think, I think just the other day, well, I'm just going to stop there. we need to keep our eyes on this. Andrew Cuomo is a bad person. He quit as governor of New York. He was pushed out of office because of credible allegations of consistent and persistent sexual harassment. He did a terrible job in the Clinton administration running housing, and I think he was running housing and urban development, or was it the FHFA? I just want to say, and he was in charge, right? He was assistant secretary and then secretary of housing and urban development from 97 to 2001. This guy did an awful job in that role. I've been critical of him for years. He is not someone who deserves the city of New York as his prize. Not only that, he lost the Democratic primary. And not only that, now he's Trump's guy. Okay, guys, have a great Thursday. I will see you tomorrow, and go Tigers!
Hello, prison mates. It's the Gen Taub show. Well, how come everyone? Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Gen Taub show.